right. There are so many real world consequences for businesses, particularly ones that experience this public outrage, which is often referred to as cancel culture. Over a weekend, Spotify lost $2.1 billion of market capitalization just from the results of the public outrage related to their support for the misinformation and racism that was shown on the Joe Rogan podcast. Doctors had been complaining about the amount of medical misinformation on the show since early in January, and artist Neil Young had decided to remove his music from Spotify in protests. And other artists, of course, like Joni Mitchell and even other podcasters, such as Brene Brown, had chosen to just take their content off Spotify. And of course, like this, of course, prompted a response from the CEO, where he said that often Spotify will host podcasts with views that he does not agree with. And but he still feels that it's important for these voices to be heard and given a space to be expressed, and that they would create labels for podcasts that contain information like about things like the pandemic and about the disease. And they would do more, in fact, to check to make sure that the information that's available on Spotify fits or at least points to the facts. But they're not the first company, of course, to experience these types of consequences. I mean, do you guys remember like the Pepsi ad where oh my gosh, I don't know if I still have this. I don't know if you can find this, but I'll see if I pull this up. But this is not the first time, right? So this is the yes. Oh yes, here it is. So some of you may remember this particular advertisement. Let's see if I can bring it up. I need to big. Here we go. That's enough. Some of you, okay, if you've seen that one, you know that like Pepsi in that case made a huge blunder where they tried to leverage some of the outrage that was happening in local protests at the time in order to create this ad that just featured Kylie Jenner, who was doing like, you could see like she was doing a photo shoot, and then uh, somebody prompted her to participate in this protest, and somehow everything became just better because she had opened up a can of Pepsi. I mean, I want to be clear, like this brand itself has still not recovered. even today. Like if you just look at the like what's going on today, there are fewer millennials that think about even buying a Pepsi specifically when they're at the store. In fact, only 24% of millennials would even consider buying Pepsi as their next drink purchase. And this is 8 years after the original ad aired. So naturally, I went on the web and I did a bunch of searches and I found out like what do people recommend? What are the best practices that would help companies like cancel proof their business? Because the reality is you can buy insurance for a lot of things, but you cannot buy insurance for being canceled. You cannot buy insurance for public outrage. And we live in a digital world, right? Like in a world fueled by artificial intelligence. And so I have some recommendations. Um, and like a lot of the recommendations, I'll be honest with you, that I read on the web, um, to me were pretty surprising because I've seen people like use those techniques directly and they completely backfire. And they completely miss the point of why people called them out in the first place. So today I want to actually talk about cancel how to cancel proof your company in 2022. For those who don't know me, I'm Dr. Ed. I'm just a geek dad who's obsessed about the future. And when it comes to cancel culture, as an Asian Canadian, I've been canceled probably more times than I can recall. I've seen times where many of my own colleagues turned against me when I was in the Students' Union as the club's committee chair. This is like back in university days. I've seen superintendents and other administrators in education turn against me when I was a school council chair during some of the early waves of the coronavirus pandemic. And so I've been exposed to a lot of cancel culture, and I continue to be exposed to this on a regular basis. So we're going to cover like three different aspects of it and consider this to be more a just a learning. What is this about? And of course, like if you guys have any questions or stuff, thank you for joining me. Welcome. Feel free to pop something in the chat. I do want to have a conversation. I don't want this to just be one way. So I guess the first question is, well, how do you get into the situation, right? So I want to talk about preventative measures first, and then we're going to dive a little bit into a shift in power. And so, what is cancel culture? It's like a shift in power. And then finally, we'll talk about specific actions that companies can take after they've been exposed to cancel culture. Because companies often have no choice. They've just found themselves in this storm of public outrage, and they effectively have to navigate these waters on their own. Okay, so let's start. Maybe I'll just add a title. Prevention. Prevention is always the best starting point. So let's start with that one. I think one of the main reasons why companies get exposed to this public outrage of cancel culture is because of a lack of diverse ideas at the decision making table. So, for example, if people of color are not at the decision making table, leaders tend to surround themselves with weak individuals who just say yes, yes, like they just agree. Um, and this is, I want to be clear, like cancel culture starts and ends with the leader. And different leaders have different reactions to feedback and diverse ideas. Oh, where did I pick this one up from? I want to add it. Um, yes, this is called coaching. Yes, coactive coaching. I learned this from the coactive coaching book that I've been reading, and it's just been This is a really, really good one. It just teaches like a little bit about how to coach leaders, and I found that this particular book has helped me understand the perspective of leadership. So there are different types of leaders, of course, and they have different reactions to feedback. There are leaders who tend to be very authoritative, and these types of leaders tend to, like, let's say they receive negative feedback, they tend to shoot the messenger. And as a result, what happens? Well, naturally, bad news stops coming to them. And they end up surrounding themselves with weak individuals who only, like, they say, yes, yes, like everything is right, right? And this leads to a very dangerous situation for a corporation because you can imagine, like, there's this leader leading a giant ship towards an iceberg, the Titanic, right? And they only have like a bunch of staff who share the same blindness and the same views as the leader. So they're going to hit that iceberg and they're going to hit it hard. They're not going to see it coming. They're going to be shocked all of a sudden, like, how could this happen? Um, and so the reality is, every company faces a very uncertain future, and nobody knows what the future is going to be like. And so the more that we surround ourselves with people who think, act, and have the same upbringing as us, the more that this becomes a liability rather than an asset. And this is why governments that lack diversity tend to make the same mistakes over and over and over again because the people that they're trying to help are never at the decision making table. Like, I've heard recommendations for preventative measures where people say, well, you need to stay up to date on issues. And it's very important to read the room. This is totally the wrong approach. Totally the wrong approach. You cannot read the room for how an Indigenous person feels about reconciliation. You cannot stay up to date on issues related to Black Lives Matter. These are system level reactions that have a very long history of systemic racism. You will never completely understand. And you cannot, like, train your way out of this, right? Like, you cannot hire somebody who's going to train your staff that will help you understand it. The only way to prevent these types of issues is to not focus on the short term public relations of figuring out, oh, how are we going to communicate this in a sensitive way and do a bunch of, say, research. This is going to come off as inauthentic. You need to focus on what are the company's long term values and what do you stand for as a company? And what will you not stand for as a company? And in today's society, with so much choices that are out there, we're realizing that more and more people are making purchases based on the shared values. The more shared values they have, the more they're likely they are to purchase your product, right? The more shared values they have, the more likely they are to share their data with you in an online platform, say social media, for example. So when people are making a purchase with your company, they're also making a statement about themselves. They're making a statement of their values. The same things that your company values is what they value. That's what they're saying. So you really need to know what your company stands for. And you need to be clear in advance, where is that red line? Right? Like, where is that bright red line that you will not tolerate and it will cause action on your part? define it, describe it to your employer and employees, like enculturate them on why this is super important. One of the reasons why this short term public relations has not worked to quell public outrage um, is because it is so self-centered, right? Like it is so centered on what we do. And the example I'll have was I don't know, does everybody know Logan Paul? Like that might be not familiar, but if you're on Logan Paul, so if you're on YouTube a lot, like myself, like Logan Paul is incredibly popular. He's got 23.4 million subscribers, and it's huge,
The one
right?
thing
And
I'm telling
so
other managers.
I'll see if I can bring him up. So, like, unbelievable. So just you take a look at his program. We're talking about 23.4 million subscribers, 5.9 billion views. Last 30 days he had 40 million views. Like he's still kicking it. He's still quite popular. Um, and he mostly does vlogs, and he was kind of the Vine generation, like turned YouTuber and became quite successful on the platform. But he made a huge mistake of filming a video inside a Japanese suicide forest, and laughing around like with his image besides a dead body. And people he issued an apology, which is basically a video. It's like, oh, I made a huge mistake. I'm so sorry, kind of thing. And a lot of people said that it seemed empty and meaningless and inauthentic. Specifically, Japanese people said that it was inauthentic. And the reason it was inauthentic was because these are all statements from his own perspective, which fails to understand how people in that region that he hurt actually feel. So instead, and so this is the like, if I were to actually advise Logan Paul at the time, I would have said that take action by including the diverse people that you hurt at the reconciliation decision making table. Get them to decide. You cannot help those who have no voice at the decision making table. Let them come up with the solution of what you should do in order to come to reconciliation. Um, and another example that I feel that is really, really good was Apple. So Apple had an issue. It was referred to as antenna gate, and in the antenna gate issue, yeah, the phones, like if you covered a certain aspect of it, oh, it would block. And one of the things that Steve Jobs said, which I thought was really, really powerful, was he referred to the solution not from his own perspective, that he came up with the idea of giving people a bumper or a case for their phones. He says, you say, right? Like you guys are saying, or the news outlets are saying, that having a bumper is very helpful. It is something that is helpful for solving this problem. You say it. You came up with that solution. Okay, so I'm going to enable that. So everybody who has a bumper, if you don't have one, I will give you one for free. And if you have purchased one, I will refund your money. How's that? I love that because this is a solution that came up, like that your own customers came up with. And all you're doing is just following your solution. So that one was really helpful. So that was a little bit about prevention measures. So next, let's talk a little bit about the shift in power. And I think that this one is pretty interesting. And I think it is important to think about it from that perspective. So we're covering next. I'm going to talk a little bit about shift in power, and I'll see if you guys have any questions. Feel free to pop it into the chat. Um, but hello, post your questions. Welcome. Yeah, and thank you for joining us. So I want to talk a little bit about how social media and artificial intelligence has evolved in order to cause a massive shift in power. Um, so there, of course, like over the weekend, I asked a bunch of family members that I knew like what they thought about cancel culture, and the results kind of match what I found about the different camps. And there's two different camps, and if you look at Pew Research, it's very similar. They have statements, and I think the Pew Research studies are probably some of the best research that I've been able to find so far. And so Pew Research did a survey of over 10,000 US adults in September of 2020. And they found that over 44% of Americans said that they had heard at least a fair amount about the phrase cancel culture. And I can imagine like today that number is just like blowing up, right? So 64% of adults under 30 years of age said that, yep, they've heard a great deal or a fair amount about cancel culture. So you can see as people are younger, generally they're more aware of social issues, social justice issues, those become more important. And if you ask people, well, what does cancel culture mean? About 49% of those familiar with the term said that it describes actions that people take in order to hold others accountable. So, actions that are taken to hold people or organizations accountable. A woman in her 30s who was a liberal Democrat described cancel culture as a movement to remove the celebrity status or esteem from a person, place, or organization based on offensive behavior or transgression. Now, that's a there's a minority. So that kind of group is a minority. 14% of adults who heard at least a fair amount about cancel culture described it as like a form of censorship, such as a restriction on free speech or as history being erased. I don't know. Have you ever heard that? I've certainly heard that in the news. They say, oh, they're erasing history. So there's an interview with a man in his 70s who is a moderate without any partisan leading. And he said, cancel culture means rewriting history and stopping the acknowledgement of facts because they're offensive to racial, religious, ethnic, and economic groups, for example. It's the rewriting of history to make people comfortable by ignoring facts that really happened, good or bad. So it's another perspective which I find like I've heard before. This is not the first time I've heard that. Uh, Now there's another group of people, a similar share, about 12%, characterized cancel culture as mean spirited attacks used to cause harm to others. There was a man in his 50s who's a conservative Republican that described cancel culture as destroying a person's career or reputation based on past events in which that person participated or past statements that that person had made, even if their beliefs or opinions had changed, right? So it's kind of this environment of no forgiveness. If we look like just overall, at 58% of US adults say that in general, calling out others on social media is more likely to hold people accountable. So it's a change in our society. 38% says that it's also more likely to punish people who don't deserve it, right? Because this is not like the court. This is the court of public opinion. You could be guilty before proving yourself innocent, and even if you do prove it, maybe you're still guilty, like just in the public's eye. But of course, like I described earlier, these views vary differently based on people's political leanings. Democrats are much more likely than Republicans to say that cancel culture calls up people, for posting offensive content and holding them accountable. I mean, like if you just asked in that survey, 75% of Democrats and only 39% of Republicans actually reported that way. Conversely, it was like 56% of Republicans, but just 22% of Democrats believed that this type of action generally punishes people who don't deserve it. And so my take on it, though, is very different, right? Because I see cancel culture as just simply understanding that artificial intelligence is not an echo chamber. You are not there just with other people who think like you. People say like, oh, you're always inside this social media bubble or this echo chamber. But it is not an echo chamber. AI is a anger amplifier. It's a rage amplifier. It's a rage amplifier because it's specifically tuned to look for engagement, right? Like this is a very clear understanding of how these we're looking for comments, they're looking for reactions, they're looking for shares. These types of engagement tell the algorithms that this piece of content gets a lot of attention. And any company that's trying to optimize for attention so they can serve more ads is going to become this anger or rage amplifier. So generally, they're the powerless who don't have the finances to take any meaningful actions on large corporations. They will take to Twitter. They will take to social media, right? So you don't have the financial means, like say you don't have the financial means to file a lawsuit against a well-funded corporation. Generally, they'll feel that this method of talking about them on social media is their only way of fighting back. And it's very interesting because this does in fact work. If you can get enough people like around an idea, you can get this really interesting idea across, because ideas can become power. And if you can get a large enough following around an idea and you can get the numbers, then you can directly force a type of change from many different, it could be from government level or from like company level. Like these are people, like even people with a significant amount of financial or political power. And I think that I really like how Eric Liu describes this in his TED Talk about the laws of power. Okay, hold on a sec. Eric Liu TED Talk. Let's see if I can pull it up. Yes. Okay, so this is going to be a little video just about power. I hope it's helpful. Whoopsie.
Every day of your life, you move through systems of power that other people made. Do you sense them? Do you understand power? Do you realize why it matters? Power is something we're often uncomfortable talking about. That's especially true in civic life, how we live together in community. In a democracy, power is supposed to reside with the people, period. Any further talk about power and who really has it seems a little dirty, maybe even evil. But power is no more inherently good or evil than fire or physics. It just is. It governs how any form of government works. It determines who gets to determine
this part.
Racial equality can generate boundless amounts of power if it motivates enough people to change their thinking and actions. And so the sixth source of power is numbers, lots of humans. A vocal mass of people creates power by expressing collective intensity of interest and by asserting legitimacy. Think of the Arab Spring or the rise of the Tea Party. Crowds count. These are the six main sources of power, what power is. So now, let's think about how power operates. There are three laws of power worth examining. Law number one, power is never static. It's always either accumulating or decaying in the civic arena. So if you aren't taking action, you're being acted upon. Law number two, power is like water. It flows like a current through everyday life. Politics is the work of harnessing that flow in a direction you prefer. Policymaking is an effort to freeze and perpetuate a particular flow of power. Policy is power frozen. Law number three, power compounds. Power begets more power, and so does powerlessness. The only thing that keeps law number three from leading to a situation where only one person has all the power is how we apply laws 1 and 2. What rules do we set up so that a few people don't accumulate too much power and so they can't enshrine their privilege in policy? That's the question of democracy. And you can see each of these laws at work in any news story. Low-wage workers organize to get higher pay. Oil companies push to get a big pipeline approved. Gay and lesbian couples seek the legal right to marry. Urban parents demand school vouchers. You may support these efforts or not. Whether you get what you want depends on how adept you are with power. Which brings us finally to what you can do to become more powerful in public life. Here, it's useful to think in terms of literacy. Your challenge is to learn how to read power and write power. To read power means to pay attention to as many texts of power as you can. I don't mean books only. I mean seeing society as a set of texts. Don't like how things are in your campus or city or country? Map out who has what kind of power, arrayed in what systems. Understand why it turned out this way, who's made it so, and who wants to keep it so. Study the strategies others in such situations used. Frontal attack or indirection. Coalitions or charismatic authority. Read so you may write. To write power requires first that you believe you have the right to write, to be an author of change. You do. As with any kind of writing, you learn to express yourself, speak up in a voice that's authentic, organize your ideas, then organize other people, practice consensus building, practice conflict. As with writing, it's all about practice. Every day you have a chance to practice, in your neighborhood and beyond. Set objectives, then bigger ones. Watch the patterns, see what works. Adapt, repeat. This is citizenship.
All right. So I love Eric Liu. I can't recommend his books enough. He's got a book, and in this TED Talk, like really, he focuses the first law of power is that like power is never static. It constantly ebbs and flows, just like water. And policy and laws is power that is frozen in time. And of course, this notion that power begets power and it continues naturally to accumulate. So you like people who have power tend to have more power over time. And it is only because of the power flowing like water and because of policy is power frozen in time that those things change. And so it kind of puts a different perspective. Like a lot of people say, "Oh, I'm not political," but you are impacted by power directly. And understanding what that is extremely important for any corporation, any individual, uh, because power is not static, it's not permanent. And realizing that means that people can band together and they can create the change. And I already showed kind of near the end where it talked about how numbers and ideas were that power. Um, so there's often the argument that is made that cancel culture um, curtails free speech, like it prevents freedoms, right, of speaking. But I would argue that it actually does the opposite. It allows people to be completely free to speak whatever they want. But what it does is it introduces consequences, right? It introduces consequence to certain types of hateful speech. And as a result, it makes us better understand as citizens what our values are and who we stand for and what kind of a society do we want to live in. Do we want to be exclusive or do we want to embrace multicultural perspectives? This is the opposite of a strategic litigation against public participation lawsuit or a slap suit, where legal documents such as a non disclosure agreement prevent a person from speaking out on an issue. This, that is the thing that is curtailing speech, right? Like if you have an NDA and you're not allowed to speak or you're going to get sued, like there is a financial penalty that is preventing speech. So it's not preventing people from speaking this cancel culture or this public outrage, although it's making people more aware or more potentially fearful of speaking, um, because like just like corporations and individuals need help with their marketing and their messaging, like you want to make sure you get this right, because how you do anything is how you do everything. People will take that one phrase and they'll go, I know what this person is like. They will take this one sentence and then they will go, I know what this company is like. So, because people read in to these things in such a substantial way, what we say matters. And our values cannot be hidden, right? Like if we say our corporation stands for these things, but then we act in a different way, that says volumes. That says volumes. So, like, this is not about like being afraid to speak up. That isn't the issue. It's just that um, we curtail some more of the hateful speech that would potentially be put online. And that's not necessarily a bad thing, right? Like sometimes, the best thing that companies can do to protect themselves is to not say those kind of things in the first place. But how would you even be aware? It just boils down to being very clear because if you're an organization, like organizations have people of all different perspectives, all different political views. So just being super clear as a corporation on what your values are. What is that line? You make it very clear, like this is what we can tolerate and this is what we cannot tolerate. So when the original survey, of course, was done in 2020, it was mostly referred to as like individual, like level cancel culture. So like a particular celebrity, these wealthy individuals that had actions like that were done. So like Bill Cosby or J.K. Rowling for some of their remarks about trans people. But in each of these cases, and you can dive them into a little bit, like people use different strategies, and some strategies have worked better than others. So, what I want to talk about next is what strategies seem to work well after a company has been exposed to cancel culture, and what strategies have worked terribly. So, the last section is called strategies. So, come and check it out. It's not there. Okay, there. So, we're going to talk about a few strategies for cancel culture, and you can take a look at it from there. The things that we can do and things that we should avoid. And so, the reality is, in any company or any individual, you can at any time um, be called out for saying something that is offensive to a large number of people, um, simply because we're not aware. We cannot be like aware of every single thing that happens, and you can find yourself with this like viral public outrage, a movement of cancel culture against your company. This has certainly happened with Joe Rogan and Spotify. Um, it actually happened as well with a popular beauty product retailer that hired an influencer to create content on their behalf. And they didn't even realize that she'd made these like divisive comments about a recent violent event. And then by the time the influencer posted the sponsored content, the company had received so much backlash just from being involved, like being connected to that individual, that within a few hours of approving that person's content, they had to ask her to take it down. And the company had to issue an apology and immediately like end the public partnership and then separate themselves. So my recommendation here is be like sure about the people that you partner with. Um, like in that kind of case, like if you've already had something, make sure that, of course, that they're a part of the decision making table, and they help to decide what are the actions that you, the organization, will take towards getting towards reconciliation. And don't feel like we can understand their perspective. That's not possible. Like a failure to understand perspective was the original cause of the event that happened. And you have to understand that, like, just speaking to your own team alone will not work. To solve this issue, you must bring in more diverse perspectives in order to get towards a solution that would be seen as authentic by by the community that is involved with the public outrage. One approach that Facebook used in order to address cancel culture was a like kind of big rebranding, right? And refocusing on a different topic. By instead of calling themselves Facebook, hey, we're now called Meta, and saying, oh, like we're focused on the metaverse now. Um, this is a um, redirection or a misdirection approach to draw attention away from the negative PR that was directed to them. So people say, "Oh, he's wasted like $10 billion on this meta investment." It's like, no, no, it's not a waste. If it can direct some attention away from all of the big issues with Meta, and it has, then it is not a waste. And so I think that it's still there's still much to be said. Like I did a post um, last week just talking about how $270 billion of market capitalization has just disappeared as a result of the actions of Apple in order to stop app tracking, right? So now companies have significantly data companies that depend on this data in order to serve you the most appropriate advertisements that you definitely want to click on. They have way less data to work with. And so uh, like whistleblowers such as Sophie Zhang, um, they talked about this long-term solution, and these whistleblowers like seem to all point to the top, and the top being like the CEO Mark Zuckerberg. He surrounds himself with, and this is one of the reasons why I think that like they're still in a lot of trouble long term, and I don't know if it's going to like be able to sustain. Like, yes, it's a temporary misdirection, but this is not an actual solution. And especially when you surround yourself with weaker individuals who tend to just agree with everything, the result is that they tend to lead the ship, of course, in this very dangerous way, and they're completely not aware of the types of harm that they're doing. So as a result, bad news typically doesn't make it to the decision making table. So the people who are making the decisions, these diverse voices, they may not be a part of the decision making process. And so it may just be a matter of time before the next public outrage, cancel culture comes for Meta. Um, so sometimes I see companies like they're starting to embrace more multiculturalism, and I think that they'll point to very specific approaches like that they're doing to support multiculturalism, because this is going to be the biggest argument from like Facebook's like, yeah, we do have a like look at our staff. We have X number percent of people from like these cultures or different cultures. And I think, yeah, like that is a very factual response. And I think a very typical public relations or PR approach. But in the end, these types of approaches tend to lack authenticity. They tend to be not viewed as acceptable by those who are harmed, because it's just like, oh, you just said a few things, but you didn't actually talk about how we feel, right? And it was our feelings that is the thing that caused us to call you out, and then caused all this outrage. And so it lacks a lot of empathy. And so a lot of these failures, in especially the short term action, the thing that leads up to this public outrage, um, is is not just like the actions that they took in that short period of time. It is like a challenge from a leadership perspective. And how they talk about their own leadership approach is very important. And what kind of actions are they taking by bringing up the people that they had harmed to the decision making table of their own reconciliation? Again, like I said, you cannot help those who have no voice at the decision making table. I need to emphasize that. You cannot help those who have no voice at the decision making table. I've seen education approaches for reconciliation where the solution was to give an indigenous person a potted geranium plant and say, oh, well, we're sorry about what happened. Not only did it not come off as authentic, because like indigenous people don't like plants in pots. I don't imagine that's something that they would have come up with. But it is also like it was this speech that one of the indigenous elders was required to do. It was scripted. It was like written down. It was clearly approved by administration. And this is frightening because you can imagine this something like this triggers past trauma that many indigenous people who had previously had their letters censored by educators would experience. This is a solution that no indigenous person would have come up with. You know, there is another example where they had T-shirts, for example. The kind of orange T-shirts to support indigenous communities, and they thought, oh, wouldn't it be great to like have something designed, and then we'll just sell it, and then we'll like give some of the money um to the indigenous communities. And like these kinds of things, you tend to make the same mistakes over and over and over again when that happens. Like things feel forced, they don't feel authentic. So at this incident, um, there were people like I'm sure like there was no indigenous people who were part of the committee for reconciliation. They probably thought it was like this great idea, 25 dollars for a t-shirt. Some of these donations again would go back to the indigenous communities, and this caused outrage, outrage that ended up on the public newspapers, and resulting in more like the public outrage, which really led to cancel culture because it had tried to commercialize something that was intended to help a community. So, why did this seem like a great idea at the decision making table? But when you actually exposed it to the general public, it, it flopped, and it flopped in a big way. I think the answer is simple. The people that were impacted were not at the decision making table. And this error, like it continues today, right? And it will continue indefinitely. You will continue to make the same mistakes over and over and over again. Like until those who are impacted get to be present at the decision making table. That's why it's so important. Like I've seen anti-racism committees with no people of color. So I know that whatever initiative that they come up with is going to be perceived as inauthentic. Even before the decisions have been made, I don't even need to look at like what the outcomes are. I know that of course there's just no way. You can't just pick up a book and read about anti-racism and then come up with a solution that's going to serve the people that you'd hurt. We lack the history and the lived experiences that we have to bring to those in order to make meaningful correction that will be perceived as authentic. And I'll have to cover this probably in a little bit more in the future. But another aspect that relates to technology companies specifically, and just any company that has like a web presence, is that they need to look at the interfaces and the technology that they offer from a language barrier or a racial lens. That is, the user experience can be very much racist if it relies too heavily on reading a lot of text, our ability to read large amounts of, say, very complicated English text. This is one of the reasons for myself, like during my PhD, so much of my time was spent on the use of speech and gestures over touchscreens because I knew that for many individuals, this was going to be the way that they would interact with computers. Because the traditional like keyboard and the mouse was just it was too much. Um, I remember even for my own dad, um, a lot of times like he struggles with like typing things and writing things. So like I remember there were times where he would just like write stuff down and I would just rewrite the reports for him, because like he was required to make reports. And then later when it came to buying stuff on Amazon, he was like, yeah, I can probably click it, but like there's all this text and stuff. I don't know which one to buy. And I just can't figure out the interface. Like the Amazon interface was too difficult for him to use. Right. And so you can see that it has like like it's very language specific. It requires like good hand-eye coordination, so there's a little bit of ableism there. You I have seen, like, I've always touch touchscreens and touch interfaces, like multi-touch interfaces, as more accessible than the WIMP interfaces or the Windows icons, menus, and pointers. I remember an instance of like a church which had decided to create an online booking system in order to reserve a spot for mass. And they thought, well, this is really simple. Like, we'll just set up this online form that people can fill out, and it'll be fair for everyone. However, while the purpose, we have to recognize, yeah, that the purpose was to be fair, the effect of this online interface was that it disproportionately hurt people of color. When I was running for as a candidate for school trustee, I spent most of my time just outside of churches because the capacity was limited, and I had to set up some stuff before and after the service. So I would see all of these people who missed the opening of the service, and overwhelmingly, they were people of color. Like, there was one older Filipino lady that I spoke with. When I spoke with this Filipino lady, she was in tears. She said that, I tried to use the online booking thing. I couldn't figure it out. Like, English is not my first language. And this really pains me, to even talk about it. Many people are not comfortable in an all English interface. And so she was lining up like 15 minutes, half an hour early before the church service because she said she even tried to take the online and view the online service, but she didn't really feel close to God in it. And she really, really needs to be in the service because she's been going to church since she was a little girl. And this is the thing that gives her a sense of normalcy in this time of the pandemic. So, of course, in this issue, the people at the decision-making table are, of course, not people of color. And so naturally, these kinds of issues don't get recognized. These are not, I want to be clear, these are not people who are being malicious. These are not people who hate a particular group of individuals. It's just they have no capability. They have no way of understanding that these will be issues because the people at the decision-making table are not people in these communities that are being affected. And so for companies, seeing diversity, equity, and inclusion not as this PR thing that you have to do, but as actual liability insurance for your corporation, the thing that is going to protect your corporation more than anything is going to be diverse ideas from diverse people. I'm saying it right now. You cannot expect your company to last long term if you do not include diverse voices at the decision-making table. Full stop. I mean, these same kinds of issues apply to technology systems. Artificial intelligence can also be racist. I mean, just look at, pull up every single celebrity on YouTube that you're familiar with. How many of those people are of color? Is this representative of the general population, or at least the number of people on YouTube? Or is there something going on here? I've noticed that it's fairly difficult. Like, it's not impossible, but it's tough to find Asian YouTube celebrities who have broken out in the same way. They may not get some get direct hate, but in general, they don't get promoted much by the algorithms. And so you can look at like AI has so many aspects. Like it's used for job applications, and you can see like there's direct bias in them. It's used for medical treatments. You can see that there is a bias in that area for different people of color. Prison sentences, they're recommending like higher rates of recidivism, which is basically higher chances of reoffending. I mean, this is hey, how's it going? Oh, I've got a carry under. Hi. So thank you for following, guys. There's a lot of this, and I'll talk about that a little bit more. I can speak on hours about artificial intelligence. It's a real passion of mine. Um, but this is something that I say over and over again: is that people think about AI as the system for the future, but it is not. It is a system that tries to replicate the past. It tries to copy or reproduce a version of the past that was most profitable for that company. Most profitable for the company, right? Not necessarily one that fits with our ideal of how we should be as a society, right? And so more attention needs to be put at not only looking at the version of history that is specifically the most profitable, but we need to also see it as if we create the systems that amplify anger, like there are anger amplifiers or rage amplifiers, then we cannot, like, you can't really expect anything, but like this is going to come back at you eventually. And this is why I really agree with Andrew Yang. Maybe I'll put his book back in. Like I really like his approach and forward. So one of the reasons I'm going to highlight Andrew's stuff for now, is that he feels that one of the ways to make companies more accountable is to make them liable, like especially these tech companies, big tech companies, for the content that he agrees, like it's not reasonable to make every company liable for everything that is posted online. However, it is completely reasonable to make companies liable for the messages that they choose to amplify. And it is this amplification that causes the type of division that we see in our society today. And so one thing I am looking forward to doing is a AI certification process that a company could submit their AI with some API to AI parenting. And we could do like a number of tests on it. And then we can certify that this is something that I, as a parent, or someone else as a parent, would feel comfortable exposing their children to this AI. Because it's something that I know is not going to cause harm to them and isn't going to expose them to like far more hate than we expect. I know this is like a super high bar. We're in a world where we're talking about privacy policies, and people are starting to become aware of privacy policies, but it's not enough. It is not enough. We need to be talking about AI certification. We need to have some way of rating the AI systems that are in the programs that you use. I do think that we need to look more critically at what's underneath the hood, right? Like, what kind of games are being played? What kind of work is happening behind the scenes? Are these devices that we are using, are they spying on us? Are they safe to use? These are increasingly important factors as we move towards the metaverse and we start to put more and more of our lives online. And I don't have a lot of time to explain metaverse today. I'll cover it in a separate session. But it's really, think of it as like the world is a browser, right? Like, so you just walk up and we already have QR codes. So there's the digital and being infused in the physical space, but then there's the opposite. There is like more of the physical going into our virtual spaces. So like a 3D internet. And that may not make a lot of sense, and it's okay because I'll explain it more next time. So if you want to learn a little bit more about these things, make sure you're subscribed. Hit the like button or something. Give us a comment. Let us know. Oh, hey, I got a comment here. Sweet. What is this? I love it. I love this. What is this? Hey, Crack Crab PK. So this is a channel that is called AI Parenting. Okay. And really, my goal with AI parenting is to talk a little bit about what kind of AI and technology would I want to expose my own children to as a parent. What are the types of things? And looking, it's a kind of like a podcast about critical thinking. And so I hope that clarifies. I'm glad to see you. Thank you for joining. Hey, and I want to say thank you to I got a couple. Corinda, Mally for following, and it's me, Tyler, for following as well. I think that you'll find that I'll cover a bunch of different topics, but they're mostly tech stuff. For me, I'm just a geek dad who's really obsessed with the future, and I love speaking on this topic. To me, it's important. It's the future of our society, and it's the future of my kids. And so I'm going to be a big advocate for this for a long time. So I think, like I said, in this new world, like, people, of course, need to realize that in the digital world, data is your vote. Data is how you use, kind of like you spend your time, you spend your attention, you spend your money, right? So data is very, very important to companies. And knowing AI and knowing the systems that are involved is the new law. You need to understand what's going on behind the scenes. We need to have more granular ways of talking about artificial intelligence. And so I think that having that understanding, right? Like, we're getting better at understanding how our data and our privacy is our new vote. We're starting to see new laws. I'm excited about those. We're just scratching the surface. Like, maybe in New York, maybe there might be some kind of new regulations. It's coming. It's coming. And I think that having something that is easily understood by most people is going to be critical, right? We have ESRB ratings for how appropriate they are for children. We need ESRB ratings, for artificial intelligence as well. People need to know what is going on underneath the scenes. We do this for food. We do this for video games. We do this for movies. We can do it for AI. And so I think that that's a big factor in the ratings. And so, of course, what comes out of an AI depends on what comes in. In computer science, if we refer to garbage in, garbage out, right? So if you have garbage that comes into your AI that contains a lot of bias in it, you're going to have a lot of garbage that comes out as a result. And you can give, you can actually change, you can clean that data, like data cleaning, data looking for bias inside the original data is key to preventing these types of incidents from happening. It's a preventative measure. Another way that companies can protect themselves and their acquisitions. Like, if you're acquiring a company, you would want to know, what kind of issues are there with the existing systems under the hood. if somebody were to independently test it, what would people find? Well, we do this for electrical ratings. Like we do this for safety reasons. We need to do the same thing for the AI systems that we use every single day. Um, and so, in the same way, like just making sure that whatever you hire, like if you're bringing in a company, it's similar to bringing in an influencer. Make sure that that company aligns with your values. If you say, no, I am only going to acquire companies that I know are running in an ethical way. There is some auditing of their internal systems for things like algorithmic bias, for racism inside the algorithms, then those are the only companies that I'm going to work with. That would set a standard, that would set a bar for them to meet. So that any company, like this would affect your valuation as a company. I see that as very important. And so always write things down, right? Like write down what are your values, and of course, if you're going to have an agreement, just put it into the agreement. You've got to have this, right? So I think that's about it for today. Let me see, a little bit of time. Yeah, like this writing it down. The reason why I emphasize that writing down your morals, your values, your principles for your company is to make it explicit that this is who we are. Because what's going to happen is if you don't write these things down very clearly and turn them into policies, later when it comes to removing a particular individual from your organization who has violated that, it's going to seem like, oh, all of a sudden you just came up with this policy, and it's clearly biased. You don't want to be in that situation. And so I'm trying to avoid a lot of pain. Like it will seem like a last minute PR thing. Oh, they just let this person go, just because it was just like bad PR. Like it'll be seen as inauthentic, which is interesting, right? Like, oh, I just got rid of the person. Like everything should be solved now. No, right? What you came up with a policy now, the issue is not, it doesn't work to blame others, right? Like everything points back to the very top, to the CEO level or to the senior leadership level. There's a mistake. There's a mistake. You've got to deal with that. And so, of course, you want to make sure, like other ways of checking is like you're going to monitor their social media. Imagine like you can check for alignment with your core values from that. So there are other things like, and you can also say like people are going to check online, right? And they're going to be looking for these things. So first of all, don't hire people that don't align with your values. That's like the first step. And then tell people like these kind of things really matter. And we will be looking for these on your social media. And if we start to see things that are in violation with our core values, even though you didn't do this, you did this on your own time or whatever, it just indicates that you're not a good fit for our company, right? And so we will be talking to you about this. And if this requires disciplinary action or something, then that's what we're going to have to do. Yes, you are free to say whatever you want, right? However, that doesn't mean that you're free of consequences. And the consequence could be you're no longer working with this company. Maybe you find another company that is more aligned with your values. And so making it explicit, make it explicit. Yeah. So there are many reasons why people get like caught in the basically this political, this general common outrage of cancel culture. But generally, it does really emphasize the importance of morals, values, and principles, making it very clear what you stand for. And I think that it boils down to most brands are not clear enough about how they positions themselves in the market. Everything that is posted is so generic. It feels like their brand is just trying to your brand is being nice to other people. But that's not actually what a brand is, right? Like a brand is standing up to something and saying no to other things, right? So what do you say? Yes, this is absolutely who we are. And then what do you say no to? That's what a brand is. It's not like, oh, I'm kind of neutral on everything. And I think the days of corporations being able to be completely neutral on everything is coming to an end. It will not last. And the reason is because it's going to come out. It's going to come out that you play both sides, and then people will see that as, oh, you're inauthentic. And uh, people are more aware, they're more conscious, especially the kinds of people who are going to be evaluating your company in the future, a lot more social justice oriented. And so I think that it's something that you need to have a very clear set of morals, values, and principles. It makes everything in your company easier. It makes it easier to know who you should hire and who you should fire. It makes it easier to know who you should acquire. It makes it easier for customers to identify that your company is the one that they want to buy from. And it makes it easier to know that the products that they purchase from fit with their values. It makes it more clear in your own targeting, like your own marketing, which specific audiences do you really want to reach? And it also makes easier, like say you're an influencer, for other companies to know that they should be working with you or working with somebody else. Because like companies will know, like other companies and other people, they'll all know if you're a good fit for the partnership. And they'll be looking for things like, what is the liability of me bringing this person in? Right? So cancel culture is often a failure of branding, a failure of branding of the values of who we are as a corporation or who we are as an organization. And maybe I'll end with a little bit on a Chinaman's chance. It was Eric Liu. Eric Liu was the speechwriter for Bill Clinton. He was a very accomplished author and a Chinese American. And he said that when his family initially came from China, many of his family members actually did reasonably well for himself. Some became teachers, some became doctors, some became programmers. One of them even worked at companies like IBM. All of them, like, they did okay. They reached a certain level. And they kind of plateaued there. They kind of stayed there for the rest of their careers. And when Taiwan finally opened their borders, one by one, members of their family started moving back to Taiwan, where they did phenomenally well. Like some became not just the dean of a department, but the president of the university. There was one of the family members that even became the premier of Taiwan, the top political position. And when he was growing up, Eric Liu's dad would tell them, there isn't a Chinaman's chance that that's going to happen for him to succeed, which translates, it means that there's no chance in hell. And his argument throughout the book is that we as a society are facing these two different realities. On one side, America is realizing that they're no longer the world's largest GDP producer. They are going from being the economic superpower to being dwarfed by China, right? So there's huge anxiety about the loss of jobs, that China's taking away jobs. And there's huge anxiety. And that's part of what got Trump elected in 2018. And then on the other hand, you have China that is looking to America and going, there are some real benefits to this competitive market. So they're experimenting with all of these special economic zones where there's a hyper level of competition to the point where even American big tech firms have been unable to compete in China because they get iterated on so quickly by companies that have many different business models that are tried, and they find the one that works best within their communities. But A Chinaman's Chance is a story of hope. It says that despite everything that has happened, he is more hopeful than ever that this could be a real turning point for America if and only if we embrace our multicultural perspectives. The fact that we have public outrage through cancel culture means that we have diverse perspectives, right? Like, oh, yes, it's bad, but it's good because we have diverse perspectives that can be expressed freely. And this is something that we need to celebrate, something that we need to cherish as a competitive advantage of American corporations. Eric Liu, in his book, makes a statement that I really believe in is the source of his optimism for North America. He said that in America, we have American Chinese or Chinese Americans. But in China, we do not have American Chinese. They are not trying to become more culturally diverse. And so that leads to exactly the same kinds of things that lead to cancel culture, that lead to public outrage. And it leads to this force of more diverse voices, more international perspectives as a competitive advantage for companies in the future. We should see it as an opportunity to embrace the multicultural perspectives that exist within companies and bring those to the decision-making table. And we should see companies with a homogenous perspective as those that are ultimately going to get blindsided by cancel culture, by public outrage. They're ultimately going to fail. They will not last long term. The more uniform the top level is, the more likely it is to steer the company in a direction that is a very dangerous direction, that is going to lead to a crash. So don't just talk about public relations related to multiculturalism. Put them at the decision-making table, and you can start to see the results. Something that is far better than anything that is uniform, anything that is closed-minded. This is a huge opportunity. I hope you can see that. I would love for you to just post a comment, give me a like, or say like, hey, this was useful for me. Give me some feedback. Let me know where you're at. Once again, thank you very much. I will speak to you soon. Take care. Oh, and by the way, this particular time in the mornings may be where I'll be doing more of my live streams moving forward. It's difficult. Like the evenings, there's often like activities that I'm involved with. And so it's about consistency. Like I want something that is going to be fairly consistent. And so my purpose with this is to, like, there are a lot of things that I want to talk about, but I need to find a time that's consistent because consistency is important to me. And so if you want to learn a little bit more, you can go and check out my website. So edwardc.com/now. Or if you want, you can also visit aiparenting.live, and you can learn a little bit more about the work that I do in artificial intelligence and making that safe for parents, making it easy enough that a parent could actually see what is happening under the hood of a lot of the systems they have. That's what we need. We need that type of evaluation. And so you may see from me more examples of me evaluating different companies and showing what this evaluation would potentially look like. I hope this gives you a sense of some of the way I'm thinking about it for this year. And that's about it. I'm looking forward to hearing from you. Send me a message. Just let us know. And I think the main thing is let's have a conversation. I want to have more conversations this year. I want to know what is it that I can do that is going to be most helpful for you in your work. I mean, you've stuck here for an hour and a half. That's crazy at like 5 in the morning. So, there's got to be a reason. And so I want to know what is it that I can do that can be most useful for you. Um, I keep guessing stuff, but you know what's best to help you the most today, and I'm here to provide that. So, thank you. Reach out. Don't be a stranger. See you soon. Thanks.